The Honourable Member for Guelph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to rise in support of Bill C-22. This bill will create a National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. First, I'd like to thank the members of the Standing Committee for Public Safety for their hard work on this file and for what I understand was a great discussion at committee level. Our government is committed to protecting both the national security of Canadians, national security as well as Canadians' rights and freedoms. By establishing the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, this government is fulfilling a promise that we made to Canadians in 2015. The role of the committee will be to ensure that the national security framework is working effectively to keep Canadians safe and that the rights and freedoms of Canadians are also safeguarded. 17 months ago, Canadians elected this government to produce real change in Canadian society. Bill C-22 is part of our plan to address the deficit of public trust between Canadians and the intelligence agencies that protect them. Restoring public trust will be no easy task, Mr. Speaker. What it requires is a return to the basics of public service. We don't need to look hard to find these foundational principles. They're enshrined in our Constitution, now 150 years old. The phrase, peace, order, and good government has come to symbolize Canadian constitutional principles. Mr. Speaker, these words hold truth today and are in fact fundamental to the mandate of this new committee. Peace is a universally recognized Canadian value. This committee will have a hand in overseeing our military and intelligence agencies. Canadians have empowered their security agencies with the tools they need to keep Canada safe and to maintain public peace and security. Yet there must be measures in place to ensure these tools are not abused. This is why the committee will have a broad government-wide mandate, in fact, broader than other partners in the Five Eyes. This will allow the committee members to review any national security matter in all government departments and agencies, and if security allows, present their findings to the House. Assuring citizens that their privacy is respected is a challenge that persists for democracies around the world. This next step will help provide the transparency that Canadians overwhelmingly voted for in 2015. Order, the second foundational virtue of our Constitution, is a crucial element to this bill. Every democracy struggles to strike the appropriate balance between collective security and individual liberty. MPs and senators on the committee will have access to classified information and a robust mandate to review and to complete the scope of our national security framework throughout the federal government. All of our Five Eyes allies have similar committees, and the broad scope of this committee's mandate will make it a stronger body, as I mentioned earlier. Here, too, the government has struck a reasonable balance between peace and order. MPs and senators on the committee will have access to this classified information, as well as the mandate to review the complete scope of Canada's national security framework. However, there are provisions in the bill that limit access to certain information, such as ongoing military operations, cabinet confidences, and information related to ongoing law enforcement investigations. This balance ensures the security of classified information and the operational effectiveness of the DND, CSIS, and the RCMP, while also providing MPs and senators adequate oversight so that we may properly protect our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Good government is the final reflected value in this phrase. It's best embodied when we here and those in the upper house collaborate for the good of our country. With government amendments, the committee will be comprised of up to 11 members, 8 from the House of Commons and 3 from the Senate, and up to 5 members of Parliament will be from the governing party. This bill is an essential part of our national security strategy, which includes specific measures outlined in our platform, as well as consultations so that Canadians can have their say about what other measures are needed. Restoring public trust in Canada's security institutions is of critical importance, Mr. Speaker. This is by no means the only measure the government will take to rebuild the public's confidence. The Honourable Minister for Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness is currently reviewing Bill C-51 to make much-needed reforms. Mr. Speaker, there are many lessons that history has to teach. Perhaps the most important is the government's role in society. Government is an instrument for good, where people can come together and work towards common goals. As MPs, we cannot forget this simple truth. We're tasked with protecting the rights of the people that we serve, as well as for future generations. We must not become complacent and rely upon false comfort and assumptions. Constant vigilance by Canada's leaders to maintain these freedoms is included in the review recommendations of this bill. This past summer, former President of the United States, Mr. Obama, addressed this House and emphasized the truth of this. He quoted the late Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau when he said, "A country, after all, is not something you build as the pharaohs built the pyramids and then leave standing to defy eternity. A country is something you build every day." If we are to keep building Canada as a monument to the world, we must take these words to heart. Mr. Speaker, to conclude, I urge my fellow MPs to support Bill C-22. The bill is a thorough and comprehensive piece of legislation. It will equip MPs with the resources they need to responsibly exercise their due diligence. I urge my colleagues to support this bill as a common-sense move to promote government accountability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome any questions from my colleagues.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? On l'a bien pété le long.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for his speech, but I have to say I don't understand what's happening here. We have been elected. The public chose us to represent them in the House of Commons to talk about federal issues. There is a principle that there are committees on specific subjects is because it allows one to carefully study the details of a bill. There was a Liberal commitment to make sure that this Oversight Committee was created. The Parliamentary Committee studying the question had a series of recommendations taken from testimony, and the government does not seem to be taking them into account. Why is that?
Guelph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the honourable member for his question. And yes, we do have a system of government here that involves input from committees, and the committees such as the Public Safety Committee is able to have experts make testimonies so that they can debate amongst themselves and come up with some recommendations that come forward to the government. Not all recommendations are adopted, but they're all taken into consideration. And I know that some of the honourable members, committee members from the NDP, had some of their suggestions come forward, which was unusual compared to what the previous government was doing, in which Bill C-51 came through with no amendments required, no amendments taken. In this case, we did have a very good discussion at committee. The discussion came forward to the government, and the government makes its recommendations, which then go to the upper house and come back for the debate in Parliament, which is what we're doing right now. So I think that the process is working. Not all committee members will get their amendments through, but it's something that adds value to our conversation, our discussion, in fact, to our parliamentary democracy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? La députée de Laurentides-Labelle.
The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle.
If you think he was a hero, Edward Snowden exposed a lot of what was happening in the United States in that process. Now, I don't know if my colleague believes that is a good way of keeping accountability, or if it's a lot better to have a multi-partisan committee of parliamentarians overseeing our intelligence agencies to make sure that what's going on is the right thing to be doing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Guelph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the honourable member for his question. And I think that really we have a system of oversight, and having a committee to be able to look at the day-to-day operations, the day-to-day bills that we're considering in Parliament is one thing, but having another style of committee, which is a committee of parliamentarians, which also includes members from the other place, really adds some value to have another third party looking at matters of security that often aren't allowed to be made public because of their true nature of being items of security, but are overviewed by elected officials. And right now we don't have that ability, Mr. Speaker. Elected officials are not included in the process of security oversight, and that's precisely what this committee is being set up in order to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if openness and transparency were a currency, this government is squandering it as fast as they are our taxpayers' hard-earned dollars. By structuring the committee the way they have undermined the independence of it, and I'm wondering if the honourable member could speak to why they have undermined the independence of this committee.
The honourable member for Guelph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the honourable member for her intervention in this discussion. And it's fascinating as I'm watching the discussion today and the discussion that happened previously to hear the members of the Conservative Party talking about openness and transparency. Fascinating in terms of what we saw in the previous government, in which actually the Prime Minister was found in contempt of Parliament for not respecting parliamentary discussions, for not respecting the oversight of committees. And in this case, we have a committee that is being recommending a parliamentary committee to undo some of the lack of transparency that we had in the previous government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable